guys, today we are talking about exterior caulking. So we'll talk through some tips on how to caulk, where to caulk, when to caulk, etc. First of all, where we don't caulk the bottom of lap siding. We do caulk around the windows, as you can see here. Typically, we do not caulk in box eaves. There's a lot of cracks up there that aren't meant to be caulked. We do, however, caulk hardy plank butt joints. Around windows, you can see here, really needs to be cut out and recaulked. Pillars, trim, stuff like that, where it's got a lot of gaps, should be caulked. You can see here on this beam, there's some large cracks in the wood. These should be caulked. And general rule of thumb is anything that has been caulked before and is failing needs to be recaulked. You can see this crack here is just starting to fail, so that needs to get cut out and redone. One thing, if you're trying to decide, is this crack big enough, does it need to be caulked? General rule of thumb is if it's bigger than the tip of a pen, then it does need. So different types of caulking we use, this is really important. We've got Loxon H1, Suremax, 950. So couple of different applications for these. Loxon H1, we use this exclusively on any and all hardy plank. Very important. Suremax, the green tube there. Anything else that's exterior, we'll use Suremax on. And then the 950 there, we use that for interior. So how to cut the tip of your tube. Most caulking guns have a cutter built into them. Sometimes that gets dull, and it can just be easier to use your snap knife. So you basically just want to take your knife and cut the tip off. You always want to cut it at a slight angle. That just allows you to get it into cracks better. You can see here, generally, that's about the size you'll want to cut, but it depends on the application. If you're doing a lot of smaller cracks, you'll cut it smaller. Loxon explicitly has a seal inside you need to poke. Most caulking guns have a tube for that. Once you got it locked and loaded, you just want to carefully squeeze it until the caulk is near the tip, and then you're ready to rock and roll. So most of the time on hardy plank especially, you're going to need to cut out that old failing caulk. So you can see here, basically you just want to take your razor knife and run it down one direction, and then we're going to come back and run it the other direction just to release that caulk. Especially at the tops and stuff, sometimes you need to work it a little more. And once you have run your knife, you'll see that usually it will just kind of peel right out. You might need to run it another time or two from each direction to get that to release. And then, yeah, it just pulls right out like that. It's really important to get all that old stuff out so we can actually get the new caulking in the cracks where it needs to be. So there's some stubborn spots there too that need a little more work. So once you have the caulking cut out, you run your new bead of caulk in there. Typically, you want to go from the bottom up. Make sure you're really working the caulking into the cracks. You can see it's also, you just take your finger, smooth it out. Then you just always have a damp rag handy to wipe the excess caulking on. It's particularly important to make sure you have smooth edges there. And no finger lines. Another place that we will commonly cut out is butt joints. So kind of same idea here. You want to take your razor knife, get it in there, cut that old caulking out. Be careful not to mar up the siding below the joint. And it's also helpful to have a 5-in-1 handy. You can kind of use that to dig the caulking out. And sometimes just kind of go back and forth with the snap knife, razor blade, and the 5-in-1, cleaning out the old gunk so we can get the caulking in there really good. Also important to note, keep your razor blade sharp. The snap knives are designed to snap off, so you have a fresh, sharp tip. So that will help make this whole process easier, and using a sharper knife is safer. Sometimes the butt joint splits, as you can see here, in a way where it doesn't really need to be cut out because there's already a sizable gap. Once we are caulking, make sure you really get your tip in that crack and you're pushing the caulking all the way into the back of the crack. Smooth it with your finger, and a lot of times it might be helpful to go over it again just to really push that caulking all the way in the crack, because if it doesn't get all the way in there, then it will shrink in and look pretty bad when it dries. So we're going to talk about some common pitfalls. Be careful where you set your caulking gun. Sometimes they ooze or drip out. You don't want to get that on the concrete. Make sure you're smoothing your caulking out, because as you can see here, you can get lines and stuff that dry hard. Here's another picture of just kind of an unsmooth line that dried. This is an example of a spot that got missed above a downspout, so make sure you're being thorough when you caulk. Here's another example. We had to go back and recaulk some spots that were already finished because they didn't get done the first time. Super inefficient. Okay, so a quick recap. Know when and where to caulk. If you have questions, ask your manager if something should be caulked or should not be caulked. Know what type of caulking to use. This is super important. Know what an appropriate tip size, depending on the work that you're doing. If your tip's too big, that can make a mess. If it's too small, it'll take forever. Make sure you're cutting out failed old caulking so we can get the new caulk all the way in there. Thoroughly fill the gaps, wipe it smooth, clean up after yourself. Go kick some butt.